So let's get started. This here, Daniel chapter 5, verse 1, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. This is where Daniel started chapter 5. We are going to go back at least 2 months before this feast started. And I'm going to give you a background surrounding this chapter so you will understand what was happening at that time before Daniel chapter 5 was written. Most of Daniel chapter 5 took place in one night, a 12-hour period, one single night. It was the end of the Babylonian Empire, the last night that the Babylonian Empire exists as a superpower. So this is very important. So as far as the background is concerned, you remember seeing this picture late in the slides. I'm going to begin this lesson with this chapter. Now, like I tell you, when you look at a map, you try to understand what you know and what you can add to this map. Now you would see we have the Persian Empire here. We have Babylon here. We have the Neo-Persian Empire, which will be this portion is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The portion in green is the Persian Empire. And we have, Egypt down here. So you remember in chapter 8, we talk about the two horns, the bigger horn coming up last and the shorter horn was first. That was the Medes. And I told you Ecbatana was their capital. Then we have the Persians and Pasagrande was their capital. These two nations were joined together by a king named Cyrus. And when he became king, when Cyrus became king, the first thing he did was he moved up north to Media and he overthrew his grandfather. And after he overthrew his grandfather, he went all the way to Lydia. And this here was, I think we are dealing with 547. In the year 547. And he decided to capture Lydia. This is far west. And at the beginning, the king of Babylon, which was Nabonidus, he joined forces with Persia to overthrow Media. But when Persia made a move on Lydia, Nabonidus changed his loyalty and he made an alliance with Croesus, the king of Lydia. Cyrus didn't like that. So that was not a good thing for him to do. And later on, in our lesson in chapter 5, is the results of that betrayal by Nabonidus to Cyrus. Now, I told you last day, we look at this place called Opis. That is important in our lesson. And on the next slide, we have a better idea of what is taking place. Gothium is a city in Persia, Median Persian Empire. Remember the two empires were joined now, so you have the Medo-Persian Empire. And the governor of this area, Gothimus, is a guy by the name of Cyrus. Cyrus was the one leading, Darius. Darius was the one who was leading Cyrus' army from this point on. He was the governor of this place. The first place they attacked was Opis, and you will notice this crown here, or this marker, is on the Tigris River itself. This was a key point or strategy to get into Babylon, because this was the crossing point of the Tigris River. So Cyrus the Great came across Opis, and then he reached the Sippa. Sippa is this little spot here, and they surrendered. They did not fight with Cyrus the Great. They just surrendered and give up and let him have access to everything that they have. Now you will see we have the Euphrates River, and this is running this way all the way to the Persian Gulf. So you will see it moving in one line, but when it reached Sippa, it split, and the river continued this way, and another tributary continued straight through Babylon. So the Euphrates River flowed through Babylon, and then it linked back up later on, and it went into the Persian Gulf. This is what was taking place at that time. So Cyrus was out at Opis, which is about 50 miles from Babylon. Sippa surrendered to Cyrus, which is about 20 miles from Babylon. So Cyrus' army was circling Babylon as a detour as they diverted the river so that it will flow very low when it reached to the city of Babylon. And this is what was taking place. Some of the military, some of Cyrus' army was around Babylon, so the people was uneasy, and the people was wondering what is going on. Are we safe? Is everything okay? So this is when Belshazzar, he had the feast for 1,000 of his lords. And I told you 1,000 of his lords, if each had one wife, there would be 2,000 people. And then later on we saw where he invited the princes, he invited his wives, his concubines. So it could easily be 3,000 to 4,000 people at this feast. They say it was a great feast, but they stress on the drinking of the wine. The purpose of this feast was to reassure the lords and governors and princes that everything will be okay. And the reason why Cyrus felt that, Belshazzar felt that way was because of the walls that surround Babylon at the time. I did not give you a definite measurement for the wall of Babylon. I cannot do that because some people say it was 320 feet high. Some say it was 80 feet high. Some say it was 40 feet high. Some say it was so wide that 2 chariots could run side by side around the wall. Some say 6 chariots could run. I leave that for you to determine. However, there was a great wall around the city of Babylon, and they were strong enough that everybody will feel safe inside. I told you the river Euphrates was flowing through the city of Babylon, and between the river banks there were walls and there were gates made out of steel, and those gates were shut at all times. So even if someone came through the river, they would not be able to get into the city because that wall and those gates will keep them within the river banks and not in the city. So they were very secure. Other people said they had 25 years of food that was stockpiled. So they had a lot of reasons to feel comfortable and feel safe. The purpose of this party was to ensure everybody that you be okay. And while Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king, his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Now, the vessels that were in Babylon at that time, all was brought in by Nebuchadnezzar. And I have read this hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times, and I did not see the significance or how important it was for these vessels to be in Babylon at that time. It was a very big deal. And last day I gave you a number of scriptures to show you how these golden and silver vessels actually came to Babylon. I told you the first set of vessels that came to Babylon was in 605 when Nebuchadnezzar was on his way back home. He grabbed everything that he could grab from the temple and from the treasury, and he went back home to secure his throne. Then later on, he came back in 598 and he raided the temple and raided Jerusalem again, and he took more slaves to Babylon. In that excursion, there were Ezekiel the prophet. He took all the vessels that he saw, so he assumed that he had taken everything to Babylon. That was his second trip from Jerusalem to Babylon with these vessels. And then in the year 586, he came and he raided the temple, every nook and cranny, all the warehouses, all the treasuries, all the king's palaces, and he took every single thing back to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar thought that he was raiding Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was going to achieve all this great wealth because of this, all of this gold. Now, between King Saul and that day in 539, there were 22 kings of Israel and Judah at that time. 22 kings, all of them acquiring wealth. So there was a ton of wealth that was taken to Babylon at that time. And this is how we saw it. With part of the vessels, Daniel chapter 1, verse 2. He took part of the vessels in 605. Then he carried out all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures from the king's house. That was his second trip. And let me show you this incident. I mentioned this last day. No, not this particular one, but I mentioned Hezekiah last day. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, the king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord. Pay attention to that. King Hezekiah, the king of Judah, gave unto the king of Assyria all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasure of the king's house. All of the silver. At that time, did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the door of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah himself, the king of Judah, had overlaid. Remember, there were pillars in the temple. Hezekiah overlaid those pillars with gold. He would take out all the golds from the pillars and gave it to the king of Assyria. Do you remember Hezekiah was sick to death and he turned his face to the wall and he cried unto God? And God sent Isaiah to tell him, I will give you 15 more years. The reason why God told Hezekiah to put his house in order was because of what he did in these verses. He took all the silver from the house of the Lord. That wasn't his to give. There was a lot more silver in Judah at that time. Why did he take the silver from the house of the Lord? He ripped off the gold from the door of the temple and from the pillars of the temple and give it as a duty to the king of Assyria. God was not pleased with that. So when Nebuchadnezzar took everything to Babylon, God certainly should not be pleased with that. And this is one of the instances where God punished Hezekiah, told him, set your house in order, you are going to die. Why? Because of what you did to the house of the Lord. Because of what you did to the treasures of the house of the Lord. This was something new that I learned. Behold, the day comes that all that is in thine house, this is Isaiah talking to Hezekiah, and that which thy father has laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon, nothing shall be left. So what happened here was Hezekiah invited some ambassadors from Babylon and go through the whole of the temple and the treasury houses and show them everything. And God was not pleased with that. And God sent Isaiah to talk to Hezekiah. He said, "Who are these people? Why are they here? Why are you showing them all the treasures that you have?" He said, "Behold, the day come that all that is in thine house, that thy fathers have laid up, shall be carried into Babylon, and nothing shall be left." This was prophesied at least 139 years before it actually happened. And they shall be carried into Babylon, and there shall they be until the day that I visit them, said the Lord. Then will I bring them up and restore them to this place. So God was saying that all the treasures of the temple and all the treasures that is in Jerusalem will be taken to Babylon. So while Nebuchadnezzar thought that he was raiding Jerusalem, he thought he was raiding Jerusalem, he was actually doing God's will. And what I want you to see in the book of Daniel, while men are trying to analyze the situation and they are trying to manipulate the situation, they are doing exactly what God wanted them to do. Nebuchadnezzar came 3 times. He took all the wealth from the temple, all the wealth from Jerusalem into Babylon. He thought he was raiding Jerusalem. But it was God's will that all these wealth and jewelry and treasures be given to Babylon for safekeeping. And where was the safest place in the world at that time but Babylon? Babylon was the number one king in the world. He was the king of kings. Babylon was the number one nation in the world. The safest place for all of God's treasures to be was in Babylon. So God said that there shall they be until the day that I visit them, and I will bring them back to Jerusalem. So God gave Nebuchadnezzar all of his wealth for safekeeping. That is important that we should understand that. And you remember last day I showed you this picture, the 2 pillars, the sea, the 12 oxen, and the lavers. All of this was stripped from Jerusalem and taken to Babylon. Now in verse 3, then they bought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princess and his wives and his concubines drank in them. So from the time Nebuchadnezzar carried the first set of golden vessels into Babylon from Jerusalem, it was the year 605. So for 66 years, nobody touched any of the vessels that was in the temple in Jerusalem. Nobody interfered with it. It was all in a warehouse, safely guarded for 66 years until this particular night in October of 539, when King Belshazzar called for those vessels that he can drink in them. That is something you're not supposed to do. And they drank wine and praised the God of gold and silver and brass and iron and wood and of stone. So they drink, they get drunk, and they start to worship their gods. And then something happened. In the same hour came forth a finger of a man's hand. Now some people saw the finger of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. So we have two things here. One, some people saw the finger of a man's hand. And two, the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. This is very important. Very important. Let's go on. What is common is that whether it is a part of a man's hand or a finger, it was writing on the wall over the candlestick where everybody can see. Now this here, Daniel chapter 5 verse 5, At the time, the finger of a human hand emerged and wrote opposite the candlestick on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. This is from a Hebrew text. This is from the Torah. And the Torah says something slightly different. Some people saw the finger of the human hand. The king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. This is important. If you go on the computer, you will see there is a number of ancient interpretations of the Bible, and it will tell you the king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. So this is the clearer picture of what I want you to see. The king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. So he was in a position where he could see the under part of the hand that was writing. Some people saw one finger, that is normal, depends on where you were standing. Some people saw the back of the hand that was writing, and they saw some of the fingers. It is important to note that the king saw the palm of the hands. And the reason for that, I will share that with you in a second. But this is a prophecy from Isaiah 49:4. But Zion said, the Lord had forsaken me, and my God, my Lord had forgotten me. This is Jerusalem talking. This is the prophet Isaiah, and he's prophesying this about 150, 180 years before it actually happened. Zion is known as Israel. Zion is known as Mount Zion. Zion is known as the Mount. There's a number of different names for Zion. For this class, let's say it is Jerusalem. And Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, and the Lord had forgotten me. But this is what God says. I have engraved you on the palm of my hands. I have engraved you in the palm of my hands. This is Isaiah 49:16. Behold, Isaiah 49:16. I have engraved thee upon the palm of my hands. Thy walls are continuously before me. This was prophesied way before the walls were broken down, way before the temple was destroyed. And God is saying, I have written you on the palm of my hands. The walls that were broken is continuously before me. God never forgot his people Israel. So, what did the king saw? The king saw the writing on the palm of the hands of God. Now, if you would observe, the king was shaken, so that the joints of his loins were loose and his knees smote against each other, or smote one against another. He was the only person in that hall, or in that party, or in that feast that was so shaken. Why is that? Because he is the only one who saw the palm of the hands. And he knew that he is dealing with the God of Israel. This is why he was shaken more than anybody else. The other people wondered, why is he so upset? All of us are seeing the same thing. No, there wasn't. The king was seeing the palm of the hand and the writing on the palm of the hand, letting him know that the people in his kingdom, the Jewish people in his kingdom, are not forgotten. Their God never forgot them. And look what he said. God said in Isaiah 45 verse 1. Thus said the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings. This is a prophecy that God made concerning Cyrus about 180 to 200 years before Cyrus was even born. And the king loin was loose and his knees was knocking each other. because he saw what was written in the palm of the hand that was writing on the wall. All of us concentrate on the writing on the wall. The king saw what was written on the palm of the hands. This was a prophecy fulfilled that night. Now in verse 6, the king countenance changed. And the Hebrew text, it said the king's color changed. And the king cried aloud to bring the astrologers and Chaldeans and soothsayers. So he was so visibly upset, and they could not read the writing. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished, because they all were seeing, or they thought they were seeing, the same thing that the king was looking at. They were looking at the writing on the wall. Big deal. They were looking at the finger writing on the wall. Oh, big deal. Why are you so upset? Why are you so greatly troubled? Because he saw what was written on the palm of the hand. Now the queen, she heard the commotion wherever she was, and she came into the banquet hall. The queen, we said, was the king's mother, a grandmother. And she told him, there is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. Then was Daniel brought in before the king. I have heard of thee. Now, between these verses, the queen, she gave the best recommendation that she could give on the authority that she had, which was Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. But the Belshazzar, he wanted to downplay the importance of Daniel at that point. He said, I have heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods are in thee. I have heard of thee, that thou canst interpret and dissolve doubts. Now, this was the recommendation that the queen gave of Daniel. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the Spirit of God, and in the day of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of gods were found in him, whom the king, Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father. You couldn't go higher than this, because Nebuchadnezzar was the king of kings, and he was saying that the king of kings made Daniel the master of the magicians and astrologers and Chaldeans and so on. Let's continue. Then Daniel answered before him and said before the king. You remember he said, the king promised him, I will give you a gold chain, I will give you a purple robe, and I will make you third in the kingdom of God. In my kingdom. And Daniel answered before him and said, he started to give him a story. He told him about his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. The Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom. And all the people and nation trembled before him. But when his heart was lifted up, this was Nebuchadnezzar's problem. His heart was lifted up. He had pride. He was deposed from the kingly throne. And he was driven from the sons of men. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart. You have the same problem. Though thou knowest all this thing. He knew exactly what happened to his grandfather, and he still lifted up his heart. But thou hast lifted up thyself against the God of heaven, and they have brought the vessels from the house, from his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines drank in them. So the first mistake he made was he lifted up his heart. The second mistake he made was he bought the vessels that was safely tucked away for 66 years, and he drank wine in them. And thou hast prayed the God of silver and gold and brass and wood and iron and stone, which see not, nor hear not, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy bread is, and whose are all thy ways, thou hast not glorified. His worship was in the wrong place. And then we went through this, many tickle. You fasten, many means God has numbered thy days and finish it. Tekel thou art weighed in the balance and had found wanting. I said tekel is a shekel, which is the number 50, and Perez is half of a shekel. That means it was divided. So your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. This also is another important point. Around this part, I think the computer went out. And the king then commanded Belshazzar that they should clothe Daniel with scarlet and put a gold chain about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be a third ruler in the kingdom. This is important for Daniel. This is important for the rest of Daniel's life in the kingdom. This is important for us to understand God's timing is always perfect. Remember, the king did not know about Daniel before his grandmother told him about Daniel. So when he told Daniel, I have heard of thee, that means he just heard of him, maybe 20 minutes ago, maybe 30 minutes ago. So Daniel was living in slight obscurity. He probably was doing his work in the background. The king was not aware of him. So God had to bring Daniel back to the front. God had to lift back Daniel to the point of prominence in the kingdom. So this is why all of this was taking place. God bringing back Daniel into the kingdom, not only to interpret what the king was saying, but to clothe him and to prepare him for the rest of his life. So there are times when you might think that you are forgotten or your boss has forgotten you. Never worry about things like that, because God is always keeping an eye on you and he will lift you up when the time is right. So God put Daniel way back to the top. He gave Daniel the gold chain, so he dressed him for the occasion. He gave him the purple robe, a man of prominence. And the important thing was they made a proclamation that everybody around will know that he is not just dressing himself like this, but Belshazzar the king clothed him like this and made a proclamation that he is third in the kingdom. However, within an hour or two, Daniel was promoted. How do we know that? In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. The king of the Chaldeans, Belshazzar, was number 2. Daniel was number 3. So Daniel jumped one spot up, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So what was happening in the temple? Belshazzar was killed. In the palace, Belshazzar was killed that time within hours. It could be within minutes of the proclamation. So Daniel jumped up one spot. But outside of the feast, outside of the palace, Nabonidus was also caught, and he was sent into exile. So suddenly, Daniel was number 1 again in the kingdom. And it was not so much his doing, but it was where God wanted him to be. So he got promoted like crazy in one night, in a few hours. And it says, and Daniel continued till the first year of Cyrus. Really, he continued until the 3rd year. And it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first. Daniel was promoted. Daniel was way on top again. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So all of this happened to Daniel because of that night and how he was clothed and he was dressed for the occasion by the hand of God through the king Belshazzar and the proclamation that was made concerning him. Now, that is as far as Daniel chapter 5 goes. The question is, how did Cyrus the Great conquer Babylon? Now, we saw Darius. We saw where Cyrus was. And at this point, Cyrus was still a sipper between Sipper and Opis. Some of his military men were there. Some of them were here. some of them was in Babylon. Remember I told you they diverted the river. At this point, the water went down this way. So the water coming through the city of Babylon started to lower as the river was going down. Darius led the army of Cyrus and they went through the riverbed. But I told you earlier that there were walls between the riverbed and the city. There were gates between the riverbed and the city. Now, look what Isaiah 45 said about 200 years before it actually happened. Thus said the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue the nations before him. And I will loose the loins of the kings, to open before him the two-leaf gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I told you, between the riverbanks and the city, there were walls and there were gates, and Isaiah was saying 200 years before it happened that Nebuchadnezzar was going to build a wall on both sides of the river. Nebuchadnezzar was going to put gates, and there will be two-leaf gates that could open. God was saying 200 years before that, on that night, that when he is going to overthrow Babylon, those gates will be open. And I will go before thee and make the crooked path straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in asunder the bars of iron. Everything that was in the way of Cyrus capturing the city of Babylon that night was made clear by the hands of God himself. Now, this is the sad part to that story. For Jacob my servant's sake, and for Israel mine elect, I have called thee, Cyrus, by thy name, Cyrus. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. Cyrus was a servant of God. Cyrus was doing the will of God, but Cyrus did not acknowledge the God of Israel. That's the sad part. Okay. We're having some problems here again. All right. Give me 1 second. In Isaiah 45:5, I am the Lord, and there is none other. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, Cyrus, though thou hast not known me. This is another time God was telling Cyrus, you don't know me, although I have girded thee. And then in Isaiah 44 verse 28, that said Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasures, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. So God opened the gates and broke the bars that would keep Cyrus out of Babylon. Cyrus army came into the city that night, and the king of the Chaldeans, which was Belshazzar, he was killed. And Cyrus' army moved in and seized the city that night. And this is how we got the fall of Babylon. So even at the very end, God was prepared to take care of his people. God was prepared to take care of Daniel, and God was prepared to do his will in that particular night. Now, this is where we will stop for the night. I want you to know that next class we will be doing Daniel chapter 6